Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, February 25th, 2026, and today we're talking coffee. As a coffee drinker and soil nerd myself, I was very excited when I met Patricia Cordero at the Oak Conference last month, and she told me her area of study was soil conservation and coffee production in Puerto Rico. So naturally, I asked her to come on and talk a bit about the coffee production and soil there. And oh boy, is this both very awesome with lots of multi-species plantings among the coffee, and also quite sad with the state of agriculture there and farmers struggling to find the labor that they need to keep their farms going. But we talk all things coffee, from what makes good coffee beans to the techniques they use for soil conservation and so much more. Had an absolute blast with this one, so I hope you all enjoy. So let's do it. Patricia, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jesse. I'm very excited to be here, excited to talk about a few of my favorite things with you.
I'm super excited to have you on. This is going to be super fun. So maybe just let's start with the basic stuff, maybe introduce yourself, who you are, Sure. What you do, fancy titles, any of that sort of stuff.
Okay. All right, so my full name is Patricia Cordero-Irizarry. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, so that's why I got the full Latino name. I'm currently a lecturer at the University of Kentucky. I teach in the Sustainable Agriculture and Community Food Systems program. I also serve as the co-director of undergraduate studies. And so the work that I do, it really involves around teaching sustainable ag to students. I'm currently teaching online and in person, so there's also that level of complexity and just uniqueness to teaching. And so we're really focused on bringing students closer to food systems, bringing them, kind of bridging that gap between people and food, right? Letting them know where food comes from. And the most important thing that we're also trying to do is help them develop their careers, right? Giving them career preparedness and professional development, because finding jobs in sustainable agriculture and community food systems can be kind of like a niche. And so it's important that we train our students to be able to find jobs that are within their realm, because I think people that are within sustainable agriculture, they're very unique, and I think they call for very unique careers. It's not kind of your traditional career path. And so that's a little bit of what I do here at UK. I just started recently in October, and so we're still kicking things off.
What are some of those career, when you're talking about sustainable ag careers, obviously farming, but what else does that sort of entail?
Yeah, so most of our students are interested in working for nonprofit organizations. They're interested in working with regional food hubs, which is food hubs, farmers markets, really kind of doing a little bit more of community aspects. There are some students that have gone into policy, that have gone into politics, that have gone into extension, some going to grad school, some go into academia. And so our program is very unique because it brings your non-traditional students as well. And so it's important that we provide a full set of opportunities for the students so that they can find their role and kind of their way in life, once they finish their program.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, look, University of Kentucky has a low-key, really awesome sustainable ag program. The South Farm, all those things that they're doing there. Mm-hmm. There's a huge history of really important research that comes out of University of Kentucky. So yeah, that's very cool that you're engaged with that.
Yeah, and I love the people that are part of the program. The steering committee, we have folks from all around campus, from philosophy, animal science, community leadership and development, horticulture. And so it's really interesting when we sit together and talk about the common factor between us, which is sustainability, and talking about that from different perspectives and disciplines is really interesting. And then having to translate that into kind of the curriculum and how does that reflect in the students, I think it's a really interesting thing. But I think really the people are what makes sustainable agriculture, we call it the SAG program, very, very special. So I'm very fortunate to be part of the crew.
That's great. Yeah, and congratulations on that. That sounds awesome.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit about your research in general, what sort of led you in this direction and what your background is there.
Right. So I'll give a little bit of my academic background. So, like I mentioned, I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and so I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez in crop protection. I minored in ethics because philosophy was something that was very interesting to me. And then moving forward for my master's, I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and I did a master's in environment and natural resources with a focus on soil science. And so I did some research there comparing different production systems in terms of their soil carbon content. And I was able to do the research back home in agricultural experimental station in Juana Diaz, back home in Puerto Rico. And then after I finished my master's, after all the literature that I read, I realized that there was a big gap between people and common knowledge of soil science, right? There's a distance. People aren't really connected to soils, right? And so that led me to then pursue a PhD in agricultural education and extension with research focusing on soil conservation. And I did my PhD at Mississippi State University. I recently finished it. I wrapped it up in August of 2025, and then I graduated December of 2025. And so my research, again, I've always tried to keep a strong tie to my roots. And so my research was in Puerto Rico, focused on coffee farmers and their perceptions on soil conservation. And so I did a mixed method study. I collected quantitative and qualitative data. And so it was really fun to go into the coffee farms, talk to different farmers, just navigate the landscape of what coffee farming looks like back on the island. And it was really a very special project because there was a crucial community factor there. And so building those relationships with those farmers was a really gratifying experience. It was very enriching. And then my project was funded by USDA SARI. It was a graduate student grant. And so part of that grant, I had to implement a workshop. And I think that was probably the most rewarding part of that project. I was able to, because I spoke with the farmers, I collected data, identified some needs, and then with different organizations back home, we created it was a runoff management workshop. And so I collaborated with organizations and a good friend of mine, and we were able to implement that workshop and create a space for farmers to connect with themselves, talk about conservation, talk about their experiences. And I got some really good feedback about it, and that's probably my favorite memory from my research.
That's cool. So give us like kind of an overview just in terms of what percentage of agricultural exports is coffee? Like, where does that sit in the grand scheme of things out of Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I believe, and this information is coming from the last ag census, which I believe was 2020. It stands among the top 10 agricultural exports of the islands. I might have to double check that to be sure. I'm sure I wrote about it it's somewhere in my dissertation, in my lit review, but it's definitely within the top 10. The thing with coffee farming back home is that because of the hurricanes that we've had in the past years, production has decreased significantly, right? And specifically also after the past Hurricane Maria, which was in 2017, a lot of people left the island, right? And so adding to that, how rural areas are becoming depopulated, right? There's people are leaving rural areas and they're moving into the cities. And then on top of that, if there's a massive migration of people out of the island, then there's really not a lot of people that are staying on the island and that are working in rural areas, right? And so that's been a growing concern within the farming community in terms of how are we going to move forward, right? And a lot of people don't know that Puerto Rico has coffee production. That's something that is not common knowledge, right? And not only do we have good coffee, but we have high quality coffee, right? It's not there are your regular commercial brands, but there are farmers that are doing the hard work of collecting those ripe beans and doing all the roasting process and selling their own brand and their own product because it has some marketing and financial benefits when you do the entire process yourself.
Yeah, that's so cool. Okay, so you mentioned the hurricanes and stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to take one quick break here. And when we come back, we will talk a little bit more about some of these challenges that come along with coffee production, and even maybe growing the coffee production up there or down there. BRB.
Today's episode is brought to you by Tend. Farming is hard, running it shouldn't be. Meet Tend, the purpose-built platform built by farmers for farmers. Plan your season, map your farm, and track every task
From seed to sale. No more spreadsheets, no more guesswork, just smart, seamless workflows. Tend adapts to your farm, 1 acre or 100. Real-time inventory, sales, labor, tracking, traceability, and analytics all in one place. You grow food, flowers, fruit, and more. Tend helps you to grow smarter. Start free today at tend.com. That's TEND.com. All right, back to the show. Okay, so let's start maybe discussing some more of those challenges that Puerto Rico, the coffee farmers down there struggle with in regards to both soil, but also maybe there's other things, like you mentioned the hurricanes. Like what else maybe comes to mind in that regard?
Yeah, I like to start off just by saying that a lot of the traditional and cultural practices that most of the farmers are doing involve soil conservation practices. And so it's very interesting when I went to speak with them, I asked them directly, do you implement soil conservation practices? And they would say no. But then you would walk with them through the farm and you would see shaded coffee, you would see cover crop, you would see multiple crops. So they do implement soil conservation practices, just that's not what it's called, right? So I just want to clearly just say that up front because that was something that I found very interesting, right?
Right, it's like almost they were sort of intuitively already doing that work to some extent.
Right, because of the tradition behind coffee farming involved farming with nature, right? It's only after they passed certain laws that they changed to sun-grown coffee because it's allegedly will give you higher yield, and it does, but for a short period of time, right? And so it depletes the soil because there's nothing that's adding to that system when it's just completely exposed to the sun, right? And so again, as conservation and sustainability conversations have changed and political dynamics have shifted, some farmers are actually going back to what they originally did or what their grandparents did, which is growing coffee kind of within the forest, right? Integrating different native trees and native plants into the coffee system, and just building kind of like a forest and including also different crops like plantains and citrus and avocado and different types of other crops to kind of also feed their families, but also to kind of sell as external crops, as crops besides the coffee.
I love that. That's very cool. So maybe though, we should back up for a second. Kind of give us an overview. You mentioned, what was it, stump-grown coffee?
It's a shade-grown coffee.
Okay, but there was another version, right, that's like more of the conventional approach that
Sun
does
grown.
give you... Okay, so can you kind of describe, like, just in general, like how coffee is grown, how tall are the trees, the stuff that I mean, I've never actually seen a coffee tree in person or any sort of like production. So can you kind of give us an idea of what this looks like?
Yeah. So coffee plants, I mean, there's a lot of pruning, I think is the right word to use, but you can let the coffee grow like as big as it can because it's a tree. So it'll grow as much as you let it, right? But I think leaving it up to like maybe 6 to 7 feet is best just for like harvesting purposes. But again, it's a big plant, so it'll just keep growing, right? But once you prepare the land and you plant the coffee, it takes around maybe 3 to 7 years for it to actually come up and give you that first harvest, right? And so I think that's one of the biggest challenges because thinking again, right, and this is coming from an island mindset, right? You have hurricanes every year, right? So even if you're within that range of like the first years of coffee and a hurricane comes and wipes everything, you have to start again, right? And so that's been a big challenge. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And so it takes around 3 to 7 years for that first harvest to come. That first harvest tends to be okay, but then the second one, I've heard just different experiences that it tends to be a little bit better. Now, the difference between a commercial coffee and a high quality coffee, it really comes in the harvesting, right? So when you want a high quality coffee, you're going to harvest when the beans are red, when they're ripe, right? And so that takes multiple harvest periods, right? Because the beans are going to mature at different rates. So the period of harvest goes around, it starts maybe late August, early September, and then it goes all the way up until March, right? And so there's been also fluctuations because of differences in temperature and in climate and rain patterns that has kind of shifted a little bit, right? But you're harvesting throughout an extensive period of time, right? And so you need a lot of workers to be able to go out into the fields and harvest multiple times a week, right? However, when you want a commercial coffee, just like your regular standard coffee, you kind of harvest everything, right? Even if it's green or if it's red or midpoint, you harvest everything and then you process it. So that's the difference. That's the difference between a commercial coffee and a high quality coffee, right? And also the processing and the roasting is going to be very different. But that distinction right there is what's going to differentiate that product, and that's also going to bring a whole different set of challenges. So circling back to that question that you mentioned about what the biggest challenge is, it doesn't have to do directly with soil conservation or soil in general, but it's labor. Right? There's not enough people to harvest the coffee, especially if you want a high quality coffee, you need people to be there regularly, right? And so on top of that, the farming population in Puerto Rico, according to my research, it's a male 65 years or older, right? So these are people that are, they're aging, and it's hard for them to work the farm on their own. And then their families may or may not live with them. They may be in the cities. They may or may not be interested in the industry. And so that adds kind of like challenge on top of a challenge, right? And so that's how whether the resources that you had, you kind of adapt to what you want, right? So many of the farmers, they don't go into the high quality arena because it requires more work, right? And so you need to roast it and go through all the process, and you need the machinery to do that, and that has a lot of cost, right? But you could also sell it to like a company or a big farmer that will do the roasting for you, right? But that's kind of a differentiation as well, right? Whether they're going commercial or high quality, whether they're doing their own brand or just selling, just focusing on the harvest and selling. Because the farmers will do that. They'll just harvest and sell the coffee, and they'll stop there. But there are others that will go all the way until the end of the line and be like, this is my brand, this is my coffee. And they'll even sell it to you at farmers markets.
That's cool. Yeah. So are there other challenges in regards to, and maybe some of these are somewhat universal, but are there like in general challenges with coffee production now, or just in general? Like, they're always the same sort of challenges, or are there new challenges?
Well, based on the interviews that I conducted and the survey data, the biggest issue is just labor. The fact that there are no agricultural workers, and farmers are, they rely on themselves to be able to do that. You have the aging population. Another factor is geographic isolation, right? Most farms are just isolated from urban areas, right? And so this creates a sense of kind of loneliness and disconnection from the community, right? And so something that I also noticed is that, so Puerto Rico is divided in municipalities, right? And it has 78 municipalities, and of those, 23 are producing coffee, right? And so even though these towns are like one next to the other, because there's so many mountains, so many curves on the way, it's hard for farmers to communicate within themselves and to kind of share experiences or come together when you're from different towns, right? So that also has created a sense of kind of isolation as well. Like, they're only limited to their neighbors, right? And so this also affects their accessibility to resources and extension agents being able to go to them, or extension specialists, or just agronomists, people within the industry, because sometimes it's just hard to reach them, right? And when you're a 75-year-old old man and you're working in your farm, getting on your car to go to the city may not be the way to go. And so that has also added a kind of a level of complexity there. And in terms of production, the biggest one that I was able to notice is the runoff management. That's why we implemented a workshop, because that was something that they identified that was a big issue, right? Because farms are located in mountainous areas, and so there's a lot of rain, a lot of precipitation usually in these towns, and so they try to do different practices like contour planting and just maintaining everything as clean as it can be. But when a heavy rain comes in, it just kind of wipes everything out. So that's one of the biggest issues that they have. There's also pest management. There's some concerns about that as well. But at least from my research, the biggest one is just the lack of agricultural workers. That's the biggest one. When I would ask them that question, that was always their first answer. They would then go into other areas, but that was always the main one. And some farmers have had the ability to bring foreign agricultural workers, but this requires a whole set of investment. This is a program called H2A, but you need to be able to have the infrastructure to bring foreign labor into your farm. You need to be able to provide housing. They need to have internet. They need to have transportation, right? And you need to do all of that paperwork. And that can be a very scary process for a lot of farmers. And so that's also another factor as well. And the last one that I will say is which is a very sad one, is most farmers are really scared of what's going to happen with their farms, right? Because they said most of them mentioned to me, like, when I die, I don't know what's going to happen to my farm. My kids aren't interested. No one else wants to take it. And so they have this fear that people from outside, from either other states within the United States or other countries, are going to come and buy their land and make like short-term vacation properties. And so that's a concern for them, because then the tradition and the lifestyle of coffee farming can be lost.
It's so interesting. I didn't have specific expectations, but in general, when thinking about what I assumed the challenges would be, I thought they would be more pests or diseases or that sort of thing. But for it to be more social, and even in this case, like cultural preservation issues, I think that is really fascinating. What we're going to do, though, we're going to take one more quick break. And when we come back, maybe we'll talk about some of the solutions to these bigger picture issues.
Right, give it a positive spin.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Certified Naturally Grown. Certified Naturally Grown is the grassroots certification built by farmers for farmers. C&G gives local growers like you recognition for the commitment of producing food without synthetic chemicals by assuring customers that your practices are verified. C&G's peer review inspection model keeps the cost of certification low while creating opportunities for knowledge sharing amongst a strong, supportive network of like-minded farmers. Apply today to be certified before the season ramps up. Applications processed within 7 days. Learn more at naturallygrown.org. All right, back to the show. All right, so maybe let's talk about some of the solutions to those sorts of situations that you were talking about. Maybe even start with the social stuff, because I think that is really fascinating. Like I said, it was somewhat unexpected. So maybe talk a bit about that.
That's why I wanted my research to be mixed methods. I wanted to be able to collect survey data because it's easier to gather up front, but I knew that doing the interviews and going in person to the island and visiting the farmers was going to give me much more rich and kind of like intimate data, right? And so something that I do want to mention is that at least, and I will speak on behalf of the literature that I've read about coffee farming in Puerto Rico, usually the social aspect, the community side of it isn't really evaluated, right? So qualitative data isn't as common in agriculture, at least in the literature that I've read in Puerto Rico. And so that's something I wanted to provide with my research, be able to provide this data to the community, right? The scientific community and everyone who wants to read it, because I think it's oftentimes in agriculture, we forget how integrated it is to the community, to your lifestyle, to your history, right? Because people that are in agriculture, it's not just their job, it's who they are, right? There's a sense of identity and pride that comes with doing that work. And I think not including that in scientific research is really a big gap, because at the end of the day, it's part of who you are, right? You can provide as much data as you want to farmers. And I saw a lot of data collected when I was researching for my master's. There's so much information about soil conservation, but it doesn't reach the farmer, right? And even if you tell them, hey, do these practices because it'll improve your yield, and you give them a whole bunch of stats and numbers, maybe they just can't do it for other reasons, right? And something that I noticed is that coffee farmers are interested in soil conservation, but there are so many social, economic, and cultural and family and personal factors that influence them into actually engaging in those practices, right? And so going into what you mentioned, trying to give it a positive spin to it, things that we can do to kind of provide solutions. I think the first one is to really encourage peer-to-peer learning, right? I think when farmers sit together and talk amongst themselves, they share their experiences, it kind of creates a level of comfort. Instead of having a specialist or even an extension agent or a scientist, researcher come in and tell them what to do. I think when they learn among themselves from personal experience, I think that's really stronger. And also, when speaking from extension, because this is my background, when we create these types of programs for them, bring them to the table, right? Have them be part of the design process, right? They can be co-creators of knowledge as well, right? And so I think building programs and initiatives with the coffee farmers will make them more effective, right? Further down the line. And I think another thing that I would say is just educate the general public on high quality coffee, right? A lot of people just, they'll do your regular coffee and they don't really take it an extra step. There's a whole industry, right, about high quality coffee. And I think the general agricultural statement of getting to know your farmers, right? Getting to know who they are, what they do, what values they have. I think is important, right? Because I think coffee, we don't really think about it that much. We'll have our cup of coffee every morning, but we don't think about it. We don't think about the people behind it, or the work, or the resources and the struggles behind you being able to have that drink in the morning and get you energized. And so that's something that I really want to highlight with my research and in general, because I love talking about coffee. Just really open the doors to the general public of just engage. I invite people to have a cup of coffee, of high quality coffee. You will taste the difference for sure.
I love that. And I also would be remiss to not encourage you also to tell us a little bit more about the soil conservation stuff. I'm sure the listeners would also like to hear a little bit more about those polyculture systems and, like, I don't know, anything you learned about that or helped establish, or just, any thoughts on that in terms of...
Yeah, I think the biggest one, the most common conservation practice that coffee farmers are actually implementing right now is the shade grown coffee, right? When we do that practice, we are creating, kind of like different layers within that agricultural system. And so you're generating biomass, and this is gonna, that leaf litter is gonna fall into the floor, and then it's going to start to decompose. So that's a really, really huge one. The other is contour planting. You're kind of like planting in a way that kind of follows the natural landscape and the natural kind of slope of the terrain is also a huge one. And also including different crops within your system, not only like if you're gonna do, I don't think I met one farmer, and I interviewed 45 farmers that only did coffee on their farm, cool. Right? So really kind of stepping away from that monoculture and really integrating different species, different plants within your system is going to be beneficial, right? Because we know that the effects that has on the microbiology of the soil, right? If you have biodiversity on top of the soil, you will have biodiversity below ground, right? And so I think that's also been, it's an important one for people to consider. And most of them do it. They just don't realize it. The way that they phrase it is like, yeah, I have a little avocado tree here, and I have some sweet potatoes, and I have some papaya, I have some oranges, and they are implementing these regenerative agriculture and sustainability practices, but it's mostly because they just want to have food, right? And so I think there's a sense of admiration of like really appreciating the work that they're doing, and most of the time they don't know the implications that has on like a soil science level. And so it's really interesting to hear them talk about that. And then as a soil scientist, you're like, oh my God, they're doing all these things, and the physical properties of the soil are improving, and the chemical and all of that, right? And so also, doing all those practices, something else that comes to mind is most of them don't use fertilizers a lot, or they're using very strategically. So they are also very aware of the detrimental effect that the misuse of agrochemicals has on the land, right? And so the way that they try to apply pesticides as least as possible, some of them don't. Some of them are like, I will not use that at all. But again, you have to also consider that they're on their own on the farm. They don't have a lot of people helping them, right? And so sometimes applying a herbicide is just the best way to go, because they need to get it done, right, before they leave the farm. And so that's also another factor to tie into it, right? There's a lot of conservation practices that they do, but some of them they can't do. Like herbicide is a really big one. They apply herbicide because it's just easier management for them to do. So that's why I think incorporating that people aspect into agriculture is so important.
Oh, I agree. I think that's great. I also wanted to just a little technical detail on you mentioned like shade grown coffee. And I'm assuming the shade is larger trees, like
larger trees.
Okay.
Yes.
So that would be kind of would it also be fruit trees, or is it just like a mixture of...
There are different ways that you could do it. NRCS tends to recommend for Puerto Rico specifically, certain shade trees, but there's a discrepancy among coffee farmers because if you use the ones that NRCS recommends, you could get incentivized, but then they don't recommend fruit trees. And so some farmers say, hey, I do have shade grown tree, I have like different varieties, but I have fruit trees. But then that doesn't make them applicable to NRCS incentives. So there's different theories, right? There's different things that farmers do, right? But ideally, what I hear most is using fruit trees, because then you can sell that as your side crop. But also the way that it also works is because you have different levels, right? It helps the soil kind of keep cooler because the sun isn't hitting it directly. And then it also kind of reduces runoff because, when rain falls, it has to go through so many different levels that by the time it reaches the soil, it reduces erosion. So there's just a few of the benefits that shade-grown coffee has on coffee farming.
I think that's interesting. That kind of speaks to that idea of like not necessarily the limitations that the NRCS has on, what like fruit trees and that sort of stuff.
Right.
Sounds like it speaks a little bit to the limitations created by not communicating with the coffee farmers when they're designing these systems or designing these regulations. Or
they do recommend some native trees, but again, they are trees. They're just shade trees, and so the argument on behalf of the farmer is like, but we can't sell anything from these trees, so we're not going to plant them.
Before we go, is there anything else you want to add on coffee in the region or just in general?
Yeah, I think I'll just touch back on what I mentioned about really inviting viewers to really think about what's behind that cup of coffee, right? It's not as simple as, it's a very complex crop. There's a lot that goes into it. You need to harvest the coffee and, it needs to go through the entire production process. It takes years for that coffee. And then many people having to go in and harvest day after day, month, and then the whole roasting process and then the shipping. It's just such a long process, right? And I really invite viewers and consumers to think about that process, right? Think about the people that are behind that and really tie it into soils, right? Because at the end of the day, everything that we consume comes back into the soil, right? And so if people are able to make that connection between the coffee that they drink and the quality of that soil and soil health, I think that'll be great. And again, inviting them to try high quality coffee and think of farmer. Really think about the people that are working the land every day and what can we do to better service them and be thankful for the work that they do. That's something that I strive to do in the work that I do.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Patricia, thank you so much for your time.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. I love having this conversation, and I hope that we can do it again some other time.
Sounds great.
All right, how awesome was that conversation? Huge shouts to Patricia for joining me and sharing her work with us. She rules, and maybe one of these days I can make my way to Puerto Rico to see some of these farms and these interplantings that she talked about. Very cool stuff. Otherwise, I think that's it for this Wednesday and the 350th episode of the show. Also very cool. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and also my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of February, you get a shout out on the show. So no shout outs today. We will return to our shout out story tomorrow with some new signups, I guess, pending that. Thanks for watching and or listening, though. We shall see you then. Bye.